Today, I'm speaking with Eric Montgomery, audio engineer and owner of the podcast Haven, a podcast production hub based in Los Angeles, California. In this deep dive conversation, we talk about Eric's roots as a touring musician and audio engineer, his transition into podcasting, as well as some interesting insights into how he's making money as a content creator. Let's get into it. Tell me a little bit about what inspired you to get into audio production.
Yeah, so that started, as far back as I can remember. I've been a musician since I was like probably a teenager, played in like various bands, nothing serious, 15, 16, doing like Rage Against the Machine covers and just whatever we could play, really, whatever was easiest on guitar, like Green Day and stuff. So always had a love for music. And then as I got older, man, like a little bit in my early 20s, I wanted to start like recording myself playing guitar and possibly even recording friends and growing that. And so that's really where I started to get into audio production. For me, it was all through music. So, and I probably didn't tell anyone this, but secretly had dreams of like trying to engineer in like a professional studio and like make albums and like be this successful music engineer, really.
Yeah. Why don't I think that you're talking about something that any of us who've worked in audio, I mean, come on, we all at one point in time envisioned ourselves sitting at a big Neve console, in
Sure.
in a recording studio, producing bands or whatever. Talk a little bit about just some of the fun you've had playing in bands and playing shows and stuff like that.
Yeah, so I was in a band. I guess quote unquote that would be like the most successful band I was in. It was kind of like a Sublime style band or like a
Right.
311 style band. Um, that this probably started in I think it was like 2011 maybe, and we did cut a couple albums like in a professional studio that of course we paid for. Eventually we did buy a van, and honestly I was 27 at the time, I want to say, and honestly those were some of the best years of my life. We all lived together in a house that we rented, and we did some small touring, mostly like West Coast, like Seattle, Phoenix. We used to play a lot in like San Diego, San Francisco. So got a little bit of taste of like what that would have been like. It's funny because when I was in the thick of that, I was like, I was almost convinced. I was like, this is it. Like, this is going to be my life. Um, like, I think we have a shot here at some level of success. Um, we got to the point where we were opening for like some decent sized bands. It started off where we were just playing to like the bartender and any of our friends that could come to the gig, like 7, 8 people. But eventually, we got to the point where opening for people, we'd be playing to like a couple hundred people. And throughout that time, speaking of like recording music, like I had a Pro Tools rig in the house that we rented, and we would record demos and stuff on that. We didn't release any of that stuff, but that also just helped me get my chops up as an engineer and learning more about like tone and EQ and how to manage a session. And funny enough, that I want to say around like 2013. I started, speaking of audio production, like piggybacking on that, I started listening to podcasts. I didn't really know what they were, but growing up in LA, I used to listen to Adam Carolla and Dr. Drew. They had a show called Loveline. I don't know if you've ever heard of it.
Yeah. I have,
It
yeah.
was syndicated. Yeah, it was syndicated. So I listened to that when I was like maybe like a 12-year-old or 13-year-old. And then of course I grew up. But around 2013, 2014, I had discovered that they were back together and had a podcast called the Adam and Drew Show, or Adam and Dr. Drew Show. It's still a big, that's a big show. Adam Carolla is like one of the pod like godfathers. Not to get too far ahead here, but at that point, I was like on Craigslist, I want to say. I don't know exactly how it happened, but I started interning for a podcast. And I was editing the podcast as an intern. That was kind of my like precursor to getting into podcast production. I didn't really do anything else podcast related for a couple years, but that was always kind of in my mind, like, oh, maybe this is an avenue that I could go. And it's funny because coming from music, there's just like a recording session could have dozens and dozens of tracks and multiple vocals and guitars and drums. And when I started doing that intern as a podcast, I was like, oh, this is great. It's three tracks of like people talking. This is like way easier.
Clearly, I think you probably identified like, hey, I've kind of got like, I've got this set of tools here that kind of sets me up to maybe be really successful in this arena. And that kind of leads to, what my next question was going to be was kind of talk about your transition from really kind of moving into the podcast production realm.
I did do that internship, like I mentioned, and then I kind of didn't really. The band broke up actually at that point, and I kind of didn't really know what to do. um, I actually moved back in with my parents at that point, and I was kind of trying to figure out my next move. And being from LA, a lot of like my friends work in like film and TV, whether they're editors or like producers, coordinators. So I was like, all right, well, maybe there's a lot of work here for that. So I was like, okay, I got to try to maybe get in that because it pays well. I picked up another podcast, and that the girl, her name's Kimberly Snyder. It's like a kind of a health and like spiritual show geared mainly towards women. I picked up that gig off another freelance website, and she had a little bit of a budget. She's written books, and so I started doing that. It was kind of like a part-time thing, and because I had some of that experience editing podcast, that was like the first paid podcast I had ever done, and then I was like, I'm going to try to segue this audio editing and this experience into the film and TV world. And so I got a gig here in Burbank, actually, where I live. There's a film school called what's it called? The New York Film Academy,
Mm.
NIFA for short. They have one. They have a couple all over the world. So I put that podcast, that first podcast paid gig on my resume and some of my intern stuff. And then I got a job at the New York Film Academy, which is a accredited college, I believe. Like you can get a bachelor's degree there. But they had at the time a voiceover program. So they had a lot of on-screen acting, like traditional acting, but they also had like a pretty prominent voiceover program for students who wanted to act but didn't want to be on screen. They just wanted to do voiceover for whether it was for like animation or for commercials, video games. And so I got hired there. In the voiceover program, and there was a teacher who led it, and I was the engineer. They had a vocal booth, and she would coach the students on what to do, and she had a whole curriculum, and I would engineer all the sessions. And that's really like what was cool about that was, one, a ton of experience in like a professional setting, and I got to work on some like pretty like big projects like Comedy Central, Nickelodeon, CNN, some video game stuff for like iPhone apps.
Nice. And then all of a
And
sudden you
so
get to add that stuff to your resume too.
totally, totally. And so adding that to my resume, and then I was like, you know what? I've got a fair amount of experience recording voice and editing voice now, and so I'm gonna try to get more podcasting work. And I shit you not, I literally, this was maybe 2017, 18.
Yeah.
I literally would go on, it was called iTunes back then, and start going through all the podcasts, try to get their contact info. And then I started cold emailing like, hey, I see that you have a podcast. I'm an audio engineer. I can probably help you out. And throughout the course of like a year, I probably cold emailed literally like 300 people, 300 shows. And I actually did get work. I probably got from that two or three gigs that were fairly steady, kind of on and off, but I did get work from it. And so at this point now I've got, several podcasts under my belt, and this is strictly editing, all remote, like all these people lived elsewhere. So I was like, you know what? At this point, I'm going to build a website, and maybe try to like parlay this into like a full-time podcasting thing. It was kind of right place, right time, because podcast was booming. Like this was like, yeah, maybe 2 years before the pandemic, maybe 3 years.
Yeah.
And I was like, this industry seems like it's growing. Maybe I can ride this wave. And since I have experience, maybe I'll stand out a little bit. And so built the first website I ever, or actually, no, I paid somebody to build the website, the podcast Podcast Haven. And that didn't necessarily help me get any more work, but at least when I was like emailing these people or meeting people in person, I had somewhere to direct them. And then that's kind of how the whole thing started, of like pivoting full time. Like, I'm going to really focus on podcasting.
So, talk a little bit about Podcast Haven, your business. You're talking already a little bit about how it started, but talk about kind of what you were doing around 2018, 2019, and then maybe talk about how things have evolved for Podcast Haven over the years.
Yeah, so man, it's changed a lot, and I still am. I have a plan in my head, but I who
Right.
knows?
Right. Right.
Dude, so back then it was just like, when I first started, let me get any work that I can. I'm probably underpaid and taking on gigs that, frankly, like, I'm not getting paid as much as I feel like I should be getting paid, but I'm getting these clients under my belt, and I can start like maybe putting them on my website as like credibility. So honestly, that's how it started. I was like, I'll edit anything and everything. This is so cool. I'm starting to get work. I'm not making a ton of money, but at least like I have like work coming in. Um, and I did have a goal at one point. Well, I had two goals at one point. One was to build like a physical studio that people could come to and record, like rent out a space, deck it out, and have a studio that people could come to, which is still on the back burner. I don't know how feasible that is now. Plus, now you got to have video and to set up. l- Big investment financially, and then it's like, are people going to come? If I put it on the website,
Yeah.
is anyone going to come? So that is still maybe on the back burner. But the other goal that was probably like the more prominent goal was like, I'm going to scale this up. I want to have like employees, and I want to start producing like, big shows with budgets that like, and maybe even own some IP. Like, we create our own shows and like build out like this thing that could scale to as big as possible. And the last maybe like 2 years, I've kind of taken a little bit of step back from that, and I'm like, you know what? I have a couple freelancers that I pass off work to sometimes when I'm overloaded. Um, but I kind of like this situation where it's just me and maybe a couple freelancers, and it's way less of a headache, and maybe I could make more revenue if I try to scale up. But then I'm like, I don't know if I have the tools to scale to like what my previous vision was. And I had a daughter recently, like a year and a half ago, and I'm like, I work from home a lot. I like spending time with her, seeing her grow up. Uh, so that's kind of changed to where I am now, where it's like I have like my little thing, maybe like a small crew. I don't want to take on as many shows as I used to think that I wanted to do. As I get older, like less of a headache is what I'm after.
Maybe talk a little bit about kind of, when you first started recording music and stuff like that to where it is right now. Talk about the evolution of technology and just kind of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so that's an interesting thing. Because I kind of came from like, I guess you would call it a traditional background or
Yeah.
something, where I kind of learned that, and maybe it's because the tools weren't as available, but kind of learned how to kind of do everything manually, where there's like EQ or use a compressor, um, or edit a waveform. And I still, that's almost 90, I still do 90% of that. I'm old school with the way that I work on stuff, because that's how I was taught. And I do think that ultimately, um the professionals, that's how they do it. I'm not against any new tools that have come out. I think have you ever used like Adobe Speech Enhancer or anything like that?
No, I have not.
Yeah, so there it's like a tool. It's made by Adobe, which is highly reputable company, great company. And basically, like, there's a little dial, and you upload your file, and you can if you crank it to 100%, that's like the most like voice processing, and you can dial it back to like 10%. It just processes a little bit. And there's these algorithms. That's one. And Descript has a tool that does it too. It's called Studio Sound. Um, and I'd say I use them maybe 10% of the time. There's one show that I work on, and for the life of me, I can't get the girl's voice to sound how I want. Like I fucking try everything and different EQs and light compression, EQ, light compression. Anyway, so for that example, I do throw her track into this AI speech enhancer, and I don't crank. If you crank it up to 100%, it actually ruins and makes it sound like a robot. But I'll crank it up. I'll put like 25% on, and that whatever that algorithm does, it kind of like beefs it up a little bit, and then I'll throw it back into my DAW and work on it more. But that's really like the extent of like the AI stuff that I do. I love the automatic transcription. In those speech enhancers, I'm not against them, but I don't think you need to be using them all the time. And it's hard to say because like me and you are coming from a way different perspective. If you're just like a guy and you like to have beers with your friends and watch football, and you have a podcast about football and you don't know how to edit or do any of that, sure, absolutely. And you want to have a podcast out and you don't have a budget or whatever, sure, absolutely, like record and use one of those to get your show out. Like I think that's cool. I guess talking to you and then like the level that we're talking about is such like a higher level than that. So I guess to be relatable, yeah, like if you're a hobbyist and you want to have a podcast, but you don't know how to do any of that, the tools that are available could probably get you sounding like pretty good without you really even knowing what to do. And so in that sense, I think it's cool because I think if you want to have a podcast just to share your message or your story or whatever kind of content that you think will be valuable out in the world. So in that sense, I think that that's great. And I think that that's where the change has been. I think probably even as like early as like 5 years ago, there was still, you still had to have some kind of knowledge. Like, yeah, there's like GarageBand and different easy ways to get in. But now I think the barrier to entry is a lot easier now for like hobbyists and stuff, which I think is great. But then it also, there's also probably a lot more crap out there too. Um, so I'm mixed. I think of the technology and any kind of tool, if it can help you, great. But I think people become like too reliant on it. I think that's what's happening. And I've even dabbled with like Chat GPT to like write stuff. And in the beginning, I was just using it here and there, but I've found that like, I've been using it a lot more lately. And now, like, when I'm trying to like write something on my own, I'm like fucking stumped. I'm like, wait, how? I don't even like know how to like, like, I mean, of course I know how to write, but like, that's an example of like me becoming way too reliant on it. Um, so it's all in like your approach, I guess, and making sure you got to keep some kind of human element, but it doesn't seem like any of these tools are going away. So I mean, who knows what it's going to be continue to be like.
Yeah. So one of the things that you have been doing, which I'm really interested in, is you've been doing this monthly series on your YouTube channel where you're kind of transparently kind of saying, "Hey, I have this goal. I want to make $3,000 a month as a content creator, and this is money kind of separate from like my main podcast work that I do as a job." Um,
Hmm.
Honestly, it's been really cool. I've learned a bunch of stuff watching you. Tell me about that series, how it started, and tell me some stuff you've learned along the way that's been a big surprise to you.
Yeah. So, how it started was, well, going back a little further, so maybe like 2 years ago, I started writing like articles on my website, like blog posts where I talk about gear. It started off a lot gear, what best microphones for podcasting, um, how to market your podcast, how to analyze your podcast downloads, whatever, all things like podcasting. Um, and when I started like writing about gear, like audio interfaces or microphones, I would actually link back to Amazon. And then if someone clicks on my link and actually buys that microphone from Amazon, you get a small kickback. I think with music stuff or musical instruments, it's 3%. So like someone might buy this mic and then I'll get I don't know, $2, $3. And I didn't really expect much of it. And I was still just writing articles because the content helps like the website get more traffic and then show up in Google rankings. And I was like, maybe I can get some business and maybe I can position myself um, as like a thought leader, quote unquote. I mean, that's like a buzzword, like a thought leader in the audio podcast world. So I started doing that like 2 years ago, and I would make maybe like $12 a month, $40. And now it's up to like, it depends, but maybe $80, $90 a month.
Dude, that's
And so
awesome.
at, yeah,
That's awesome, man.
yeah. And it was intentional to some extent, but I was also like, I'm just going to do this anyway. If I can make like a little bit of extra money, like that's awesome. And then, so I started seeing that come in $20, $40. I was like, it got me excited. It started building momentum. I was like, all right, I'm going to keep doing this. And then fast forward, I met a friend who's a podcaster. And what's really interesting about him is he started monetizing his podcast before it even launched. And not a big audience. I think to this date, the entire show gets like maybe 2,000 downloads a month or something like that, 1,500 downloads a month. I forgot exactly the number, but relatively small show. I mean, that's a good achievement. But um, and he told me his whole strategy was literally also cold emailing. And he would cold email these brands and businesses and be like, hey, I'm launching a podcast. Would you like to sponsor it? And his whole thing, from what he told me, was like, if you want to get sponsors for your show, the amount of downloads doesn't matter as much, or the amount of like YouTube views doesn't matter as much as you think it does. If you have if you're in like the niche of the brand, and they think that you're speaking their language, and even if it's a small audience but it's like a very niche audience, if you email enough people, you will get some yeses. And so he started doing that. And then he had some success. Like he got sponsors before the show launched, and even ongoing, he gets these sponsors. And part of what he was doing, and I full on copied him, because he would start making videos like, hey, I have a goal as a creator to make X amount of money, and I'm going to take you through that journey with these videos. So it's like, you know what? I'm making a little money from this blog. I'm gonna start doing that. And so really the goal with it is exactly what he said, showing people that even with a small niche, a small audience, you can start to make a little bit of money from your content. And $3,000 a month is a lofty goal. But at the same time, if you put that work in and over time, I feel like I can probably get there. But it's really just to show creators like, hey, you can probably do this too. Like, yeah, I have the chops when it comes to like audio production and stuff, but this whole other thing of like creating content and like trying to talk to brands, and I don't with that. And so if I don't know what the hell I'm doing with that, then and I'm doing it, then you can probably do it too. But yeah, taking people on that journey. And what's funny, Evan, is the place that I make the most amount of money, it's called the Amazon Influencer Program, and I hate that
Yeah.
word influencer. But so you can join this program. It's part of Amazon. It's separate from the blog, so that's actually called Amazon Associates, and it's called Offsite Commission, because you're not making money on Amazon's website directly. You're making money offsite on your own website. But so the Amazon Influencer Program. Um, if you go onto Amazon right now, you pull up any product like headphones, everybody has you scroll down to the bottom, there's all these written reviews of these headphones were great, blah, blah, blah. I didn't like this, but I loved this. If you keep scrolling down to the bottom, there's actually video reviews of the product. And so you can join this program on Amazon. And the beauty is that the production value doesn't have to be high. And you just talk about, hey, like you'd make a video review and said, hey, these are the Sony head MDR 70, sorry, I'm off mic, 7506s. And I like these because like they're super cushiony and they do a good job of isolating. And you just kind of speak truthfully about what you like about the product. And I don't know the exact way that it happens, but your video will appear on that product page. So if you scroll the bottom, and then if people watch that video, I think and I'd have to, don't quote me on the exact qualifications, but I think if they watch 30 seconds of your video, at least 30 seconds, and then they buy that product, you get a commission. And so I started
Wow.
following all these YouTubers who are talking about making money with the Amazon influencer program. And they say the best thing to do is you just go around your house and anything you bought on Amazon, you can review it. You do a video review, but you didn't even have to buy it on Amazon. As long as it's something that's sold on Amazon, um, you create the video. And so that's honestly, and I was seeing all these people like, this is the fastest side hustle to scale, like the easiest way to scale a side hustle. And so I was like, all right, let me give this a go. And started making money. I think the most I've made was like last month with Black Friday or October. No, not Black Friday. It was Amazon Prime Day in October. Made like $700 from doing that. And it's all a numbers game. It's really like the funniest side hustle because they call it the influencer program. How you get approved is you go to the website and then they make you put in your social media handles or like your
Yeah.
YouTube URL or your website URL. And I don't know, they don't say exactly what the qualifications are, but I mean, people are getting accepted with just a couple hundred followers. But yeah, honestly, just having fun with it, not trying to take myself too seriously. And if I can make a little bit of money, hey, I guess, yeah, maybe it's a little bit of a sellout thing, but
Hey, man,
hey, what are you going to do?
decentralizing your income streams. So it's like if one month one doesn't work, you've still got these multiple other passive income streams coming in. And when you build them all together, put them all together, they create an income that hopefully is sustainable.
Yeah, and honestly, that is a little bit a part of the goal. I mean, I don't it's not like pie in I guess it is kind of like pie in the sky, but the editing and the audio engineering, I love it. It's truly been like my passion since I was, like a teenager. But that being said, the older I get, it is a grind and
Yeah,
being
it's
on the
your job.
computer. It's yeah, and it's a grind and it's a love hate sometimes. But I'm like, man, if I could make a little bit of this money on the side to kind of offset that and not have to do as much editing, then that's a win, And whatever comes of it, if it continues to grow, I'll be pumped. If it starts to go down or this Amazon program, like there's rumors that they're going to pull the plug on it. If that happens, then it's been fun. So, I mean, but don't you feel that way? Like, and you've probably been doing this a little bit longer than me, but like the editing, like and mixing, and you probably love it, but don't you feel sometimes like it's like, it's this
Yeah.
grind, man. I
I
got like a little carpal tunnel, I think.
yeah.
Like,
My goal is to never spend more than 6 hours a day working on a computer. Um,
yeah, I like that.
that's my goal. But we'll see. Just to wrap up, like really quickly,
Mhm.
just maybe tell me a couple of like your goals that you have for this next year, 2024, both professionally and personally. I know one of them is probably spending time with that little kiddo of yours.
That totally. One like personal goal is my wife and I are trying to buy a house or a condo.
Mhm.
So that's on our radar. We rent right now, and with my daughter, I'm actually in her room. It's a 2 bedroom. I used to have like a fully rad studio in here, but now it's like I'm just smushed in the corner. Her crib is over there. Um, that's a personal goal. Um, Also, to get a little bit healthier, I did blood work recently and my cholesterol was like through the roof. And so it's just like stress eating and being a new dad. And like, so that, I mean, just to be honest, that's a personal goal. Professionally, with my podcast, I like what I'm doing, but I maybe want to pivot a little more because it's so focused on podcasting and my whole job is podcasting. And I was just like, always podcasting, podcasting. I want to try to maybe pivot that slightly and talk more about kind of what we're doing, maybe talk about like YouTube creation, talk about content creation as it relates to podcasting, but put a little spin on it and talk about maybe creativity in general and how to tie that into to content somehow. I'm not completely sure, but sometimes it's just like my whole life is like podcasting. It's like sometimes
Yeah.
it's kind of overwhelming.
Yeah, well,
It's just
like
like,
I'm
dude,
like
I need
when I emailed you, I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna. The theme of this is like interviewing a podcast expert. I mean, you are a podcast expert, though.
well, thank you. And dude, I enjoy talking about it. I feel like it comes very naturally to me. And I think it's good, like what I'm doing, what you're doing. I've got a couple other people I've had on my show who are like, yeah, in the podcast industry, and just helping podcasters, providing tips, providing our thoughts or our roadmap for what worked for us, and maybe if we're a little old school, talk to some newer people that are up on like the tech or what's working for them, and just kind of, I think it just helps. One, I hope it inspires people to create, and hopefully it just can provide some like wisdom and insight to people who are want to do what we're doing, but they're not quite there yet. I think it can be educational. And then, I got to throw in some other kind of like fun thing. So it's not just so like,
Right, right, right.
podcast centric.